Noelle Salazar. I'm really excited to have you here today, Noelle.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So the big news for you today is that you handed in a book.
I did. Book 3. I'm super excited about it.
Are you feeling a little run over?
Like by a few semi-trucks, one after the other. Yes.
Right? I don't know about you, but I always get that sort of like big sense of relief as at the same time as I'm feeling really exhausted. It's like I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, no, that's the exact feeling. Like I was like, oh, it's gone, it's done, and then I'm like, I'm so tired. And then I have another book I have to write. So I'm like, okay, we gotta just get back on that train, keep going.
Well, take time to breathe. So speaking of, as we get started, why don't you tell our viewers just a little bit about you and your publishing journey, like to publication, and what your first book and.
Okay. Yeah, so my first book was The Flight Girls, and it came out in 2019, and that was, I've been asked recently, like, what's the difference between the first book and the second book? Is there a difference? And I'm like, the difference is massive. The first book, I didn't have an agent, so I was writing forever. I wrote that book and researched for that book for like 6 years before I even had an agent. And then once I had an agent, there was 2 years of submitting and editing based on feedback. And then we finally got the offer. So it's like I got my agent 2 years later, we got the offer, and 2 years later, the book came out. So it was this really like 10-year period.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a really long time, but I had all the time in the world to work on that book. And then the next book, it was, they bought the next book, and then I was on a deadline, and then we went into lockdown. And so I was trying to write this kind of traumatic story while we're like being traumatized. And also I had a 7-year-old next to me at the kitchen island who's doing virtual school and going, mom in my ear while I'm trying to write this book. So yeah, my story, it started out nice and easy breezy, and then got a little less. So yeah, that's my publishing journey.
Wow. Okay. Well, I gotta say, I'm glad that you mentioned the Flight Girls and how long it and that there were very different stories, because not just in the time that you took to write them, but like the Flight Girls was set stateside.
Yes.
Right. And Angels of the Resistance is, of course, European theater.
Right.
And by the way, I love both books. I read your first one when it first came out, and then because I'm a World War II junkie. And so I read that, and then when I saw this one coming out, I thought I've got to get it. And then I'm like, okay, now we have to have Noelle on the show. So, it is very different in that it's stateside, it's women pilots, and you're looking at Dutch resistance in the second book. So what led you to explore that particular storyline for Angels of the Resistance, and how did the research differ?
I mean, the research was different in just that, I had all that time for the first book. And it was interesting too, because that story, they both fell in my lap, basically. So the first one, I was at my aunt's house, and she was studying to be a docent at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. And they were just about to have this Women Air Force Service pilots exhibit. So she had a couple books, and I just started flipping through them. And because I am a longtime lover of World War II and the stories that come out of that war that are just devastating and inspiring, but seeing women, which I hadn't seen women's stories really.
Right.
Like in school, we'd get our history books, and there'd maybe be something about some woman who did something in the margin of the book, but the textbook, but it was always about the men. So to find these stories about these women was amazing to me. And then for Angels, again, I have this lovely friend, another author friend, who emailed me one day, and the subject line said, "Write this book." And I opened the email, and there's just this article about the Oversteegen sisters and Truus and Freddie Oversteegen. And they were these Dutch sisters that joined the resistance when they were 14 and 16. And they had a variety of jobs, but their main job was to seduce and kill Nazis and Dutch collaborators. And I was like, how do I not write that book? That sounds amazing. And so that was a quicker round of research, because now I'm on deadline. It's my second book. But again, like deep diving as much as I could. I was reading different books on like resistance and groups in France and resistance groups in the Netherlands, and anywhere they had resistance groups, I was trying to read just to get like those details. I couldn't get it from this book. I was hopefully going to get it from this book. I read a book that was written by a woman who befriended the Oversteegen sisters for the last 20 years of their life. And so there was like this really great account of the work they did, but it didn't like describe necessarily the killing and the planning. And so I remember my mom, after she read the book, she called me and was like, how did you like write those scenes? Where did you read about the scenes where they were killing them? And I was like, I mean, I felt kind of weird saying, oh, I made that up.
In my head.
What's wrong with me? I don't need therapy. I did need therapy. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the research is always kind of the same. I feel like it's always just this deep dive into whatever I can find online, and then finding the books, and then just kind of forming it all to match the story I want to tell.
Did you travel over? Did you go to Haarlem?
I did. So that was something I learned when I was doing the Flight Girls. I had been so the Flight Girls is on Oahu, then in Texas, and then in Paris. And I had been to Paris and I had been on Oahu, but I had never been to Texas at that point. And so when I originally wrote Texas, it was like tumbleweeds and like seasons. They don't really have seasons, I learned. And then my brother, funnily enough, like had moved there. So I went to Texas and I was like, oh, it's green. I had no idea. I don't know where there's tumbleweeds, but I don't see any. And so I had to completely rewrite what Texas looked and felt like. So having that experience, I was like, I need to go to Haarlem. I have no idea how to write the Netherlands. And so, you can Google map and drop yourself in and, street view and stuff, but it is not the same. And I never would have been able to write Haarlem authentically because I had no idea like how quiet it is. It was so quiet when I was there. And then you're imagining, in the 40s, it would have been even quieter, most likely. There had been less people, less buildings. And then you imagine Nazis and tanks and troops marching in and just how stark that would have been. So it informed a lot just getting to go there and also just there's something about when you're writing, I think, a story inspired by real people in a real place, standing in those spaces and just really, I did it with the Flight Girls too. When I went to Texas, I actually went to where they had trained and it was like, they stood here, they flew in these skies. And to me, that was really special. So again, with this second book, it was really special to get to go there and like walk these streets and wonder and go in like the Ten Boom Museum and see how incredibly small and cramped that space was. And then where they were hiding people, it was incredible. I felt
love that you included them in the book, by the way.
I mean, how could I not? I mean, they have their own incredible story. So it was really special. And also like to get to see that museum, you had to basically show up. They only do like certain amount of showings. And I was there for maybe 3 days. And one of the days they weren't doing the tours and you have to get there by a certain time. And then it's like first come, first serve. So if you have to be part of like that first 20 people or that's it. Yeah. And so I missed the first one. And so the next one, I was standing outside like 2 hours before, and I just stood there, like right next to the door, like I am getting in here. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
Nice. Well, the nice thing with both books, and I know, yes, they're very different, but I found that what's common in them is that you have women in non-traditional roles and dangerous roles, like not just non-traditional, but dangerous roles during a time of war. And I really like that strong woman angle. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that not everyone comes out unscathed in either book.
Right.
I think Angels of the Resistance, you see that a lot more. It's definitely grittier than the Flight Girls. But it's still, there are consequences and not everyone's going to make it. And it shows that sacrifice isn't limited to the battlefield, right?
True.
So Is this a theme that you're planning on continuing in future books?
I mean, it's funny, a long time ago when I got my agent, I was a little bit confused about, you hear most people write in one genre for the majority of their career, and I was like, I have so many story ideas and they're not all in one genre, but the common theme is a woman persevering. I love these stories of just that, of women persevering, of being in these situations. Or with Audrey and the Flight Girls, she just didn't want to be put in this box that she was seeing all her friends and her mother, all these women. She just watched them do this thing, and she was just like, I'm not like that. I don't necessarily want that. And she had this whole lesson to learn about, you can have more than one thing, and if you do kind of want that, it's okay. You don't have to like conform to one thing. But I love, I don't know if it's because I'm always learning and striving and just trying to figure out a way to do life better, that I'm just inspired by these women that are like trying to find a way to do life better, or stand up for themselves, or stand up for the underdog. I love underdog stories so much. But so, yeah, I think in my third book, I feel like it's maybe it's definitely not as dangerous as Angels was, but it's still somebody who's just, she's just trying to find her way and make a way for herself, like not have to lean on anybody. Like I feel that that's kind of the theme, is just these women like really wanting to do this themselves, and not have to count on anybody, but also then sometimes learning that sometimes you do have to kind of ask help along the way.
Right. So I posted one. It was, I think, on Instagram. I posted when I was about a third of the way through, like, this is like YA meets historical. And then I got like halfway through the book and I like backtracked big time, because I'm like, okay, this is not YA. So what I really loved about it though was the progression of the sisters. So when they're 14 and 16 when the story opens, and they are so like typically teenager, right? They're concerned about things that girls that are 14 and 16 should be concerned about. They're concerned about school and their family and their social lives and their friends and their frizzy hair, that kind of thing. And I was just like, this was lovely. And you can sense the danger coming. Yeah. But it was really like, I just really loved how they were just boys, and how Diedrich was just gave her a bad feeling, and
he gives me a bad feeling.
So I really, really loved that. And then then you took them on this journey from like those innocent girls to like really courageous, almost hardened resistance fighters as the years went on. And there's even I think it's Charlie who says to Lien that he's watched her go from he was always in awe of the girl, but he's even more in awe of the woman that she's become. And I thought that was just such a lovely thing for him to say.
Yeah.
A little intimidated by her, at some points. But I think the girls find themselves in an area where their actions then become morally gray with the things that they're doing. And the story becomes, like I said earlier, quite gritty, which I loved. I was just like, wow, she's not holding back. I loved how the emotions came in, where with both characters, they either carried guilt or questioned if what they were doing was any different than what the enemy was doing. And it wasn't an easy job for them emotionally or physically.
Yeah.
So how difficult was it to write those sections? And your mother's comment notwithstanding, and those details, like, because I know when I'm writing, like when you really get into your character's emotions like that, it can actually take quite a toll on you.
Yeah.
And sometimes we resist, kind of opening a vein and putting that on the page because it's hard. So just maybe you want to talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. I think as a writer, it's part of your duty to like kind of give something over of yourself to make something authentic. And I don't know how you can write feelings without doing that, because you have to feel it. If I'm not crying while I'm writing stuff like that, then I'm not doing it right, because I have to feel it myself. If I, I just, at that time, if you go back in I don't know if they're maybe on my Instagram feed. They used to be on my stories. I don't know if I did it so much on my Instagram feed, but I had noticed while I was trying to get into these scenes of, I'm trying to write murder. I've never murdered anybody, and they're young. And I'm like trying to what would I feel standing in the dark with a gun, with my sister's going to lead some guy out who could easily take both of us out.
Right.
If he knew what we were up to. Or
she was tiny.
And she was tiny. And so, and she looked like 12, and they were in danger. And so I think my first pass on that third draft of the book that I wrote, I kind of sort of tiptoed around these things, and the edits I got back, the notes from my editor were like, but what are they feeling? And I'm like, they feel bad, because I kind of didn't want to go there. And this book became really personal to me, because I finally, so going back to the Instagram thing, I had noticed to get into these scenes, I would put on a pair of headphones, find some really haunting, sad sounding music, and I would lay on the floor. And I would just walk myself through these moments as if it were me having to go through it, and I would cry. And then I noticed I was doing it so much that it kind of became funny to me. So I started taking pictures, just documenting. I'm writing a book, click. This is how you get emotion. But it ended up bringing up an old trauma from when I was 15, this same age as these girls. So then I was like, oh my gosh, this is becoming like a cathartic thing, that I'm going through. And I ended up going I should probably go to therapy, and I should probably deal with this thing but it was amazing that how it really just sort of pulled the stuff out of me. And I wanted to shut it down, but at the same time I was like, this is what they would have felt. They would have had PTSD. They would have felt guilty. They would have questioned, again, like you said, how is this different from what the other side is doing?
Yeah.
And even with the Flight Girls, there was this one, like I said, we were out on submission for 2 years, and there was this one editor that was interested, and she was like, well, the book's a little too long. Can you cut 40,000 words? And we're like, sure. And it was a whole character got cut. And there was a section when Audrey came home after Pearl Harbor, and it was kind of a whole her at home experiencing what, they didn't call it then, but what we know now is PTSD.
Yeah.
Her experiencing that, hearing a car backfire and panicking. And there were moments with her sister that were really sweet. And I just feel and I don't think I do it necessarily consciously. It's just my mind goes there. What would you be thinking? How would this affect you? And I think it's really important to know that they didn't just do these jobs like it was nothing. They were affected for the rest of their lives. And in that book, I mentioned the woman who knew them for the last 20 years of their life. They told her how they had nightmares and, for years afterwards. And so I know they were affected. And, just how could you not be? And it makes you just think of all these poor soldiers that came home and probably never got any kind of help and just went on. And even my grandfather, he would never talk about it. If you kind of asked him what was it like, he'd just sort of, it was horrible, and he didn't want to talk about it. And understandably, because I just can't imagine, I don't think maybe in the moment you numb down to what you're doing, what you're having to do, but then you come home and I can't, it's in you. And, I've learned trauma changes you physically. So,
right.
So I can't imagine what this generation of people was dealing with.
Right. Because even with trauma, even our brain tries to keep us from going back there as a protective mechanism.
Yes.
So to really, so like, yay you, I guess, for, for allowing yourself to go that deep, and bringing up some stuff that was difficult for you, and hopefully that was a healing process for you as well.
It really was. I mean, it was, the whole thing was, I mean, it was hard at the time, and I was like, no, they just feel bad.
Yeah.
At the same time, it was like, I want to tell this story, and I want to tell it authentically, and I want to be honest about what they would have felt. And if I have to go there, then I guess I'm going to go there. And it really was cathartic for me. And I'm in a place.
You did go there, and it was lovely, because I certainly felt the strength of their emotions and the complexity of their emotions. So, yeah, I loved this book. Like I was saying to you earlier, I love the Flight Girls. And so when I saw Angels of the Resistance, I'm like, yes, I'm going to buy her next book. But then I finished this one, and I just love this book.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So going back to the YA angle, in your author's note, you mentioned that you are writing a YA,
mm-hmm.
or we're writing a YA. And so why don't you tell us maybe a little if that's still a thing, and then what else is coming up for you?
Okay. Yeah. So the YA is, they get titles, but sometimes the titles get changed. Right. So it's tentatively, and has been called The Lightkeeper since it appeared in my head about 10 years ago. So when my daughter was a baby, I would take her for walks, and my son would be with me. He was 8 at the time. And one day I had this idea, and I started telling him while we'd take walks, and he just was in love with this idea so much that I was like, okay, I have to write this book. And then I didn't write that book for years and years and years. And last year I had some time in between projects, and I was like, I'm gonna write this book. So I have fully written the book. I have gotten notes back from my agent that I haven't been able to address yet because I have 2 books on deadline. But it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Meet Joe Black, which,
okay, yeah.
So Brad Pitt is death. And then the book or the movie, The Fault in Our Stars.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like a mashup of those 2 ideas. It's this bittersweet, beautiful, sad story. I love bittersweet. So it's definitely bittersweet. And I don't know if anything will ever come of it. I mean, I love this story probably more than anything I've ever written ever. I don't know. It just lived in my heart for so long. So I hope one day somehow it'll end up in the world. But I don't know. I think it's just a special, interesting, quirky love story. I don't really want to say more than that because it's just, I don't know. I think it's magic. And so I hope other people find it to be magic as well. As for did you ask what I'm working on next?
Yeah.
Okay. So my next book that comes out October 3rd is called The Roaring Days of Zora Lily. And it's set in the 20s in Seattle in the jazz era. And it's about a seamstress and just this young woman who, again, like my women of past, is just trying to make a path for herself in the world, to find where she belongs in the world. I always find it interesting how so many times we strive for something, not realizing like we sort of already have it, and just trying to, it's usually about acceptance of ourselves, which is kind of her story. But it's speakeasies and dance girls, and there's some Hollywood in it, and it's bookended by a present day story. So there's a little bit of a mystery, and it's just different and lighter and more sparkly than Angel. I feel like it just, it has that same kind of that girlfriend camaraderie that the Flight Girls has, but that also Angels has between the sisters. And yeah, I just think it's fun and a departure from World War II for a little bit. I think I needed a little break.
Yeah, well, and it's a little sparkly from time to time, right?
Yes. And also, again, I feel like all my stories kind of, stories always obviously come from somewhere, but so far mine have sort of landed in my lap in different strange ways. So this one came because I was at a memorial service for a great aunt. My mom and my aunt were talking about, like, I think my aunt was on ancestry.com and trying to trace my on the maternal side, our ancestors. And she starts talking about my great great grandmother. And I had met my great grandmother, but I'd never met her mother, or even knew her name. And what I did know about my family was that my great great grandmother and her husband had come from Canada to Ballard, which is a part of Seattle, in like the early 1900s, and he worked for a logging camp. They lived in the logging camp, and they were part of the logging boom of Seattle that built the city. And I had seen pictures of my great grandmother, and she had, like, I think 10 siblings, like 9 or 10 siblings. Most of them were not wearing shoes in this picture. They had this tiny shack of a house that they were standing in front of. But their mother, my great great grandmother, was named Zora Lily. And I was like, what? I had never heard this name. I couldn't believe it in some shape or form hadn't been passed down.
Right.
But I just decided then and there, Zora Lily needs a story, and I'm going to make her one. And so there's some, like, there's a nod to the logging roots, and it's just like a love. I feel like a love note to the city that I have loved my entire life. And so it's exciting for me to get to, be in Seattle and talk about Seattle and share a little bit of Seattle's history and its jazz history. It was just exciting. It was fun to research. So that's what's next.
Not that you've been busy or right?
Not at all.
Oh, I just lost my screen for a second. Sorry about that. So it was like, oh my God, my screen went black. So I want to bring this up just so that everyone who's watching can see what the cover looks like. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
And, hop out and grab it. And it was out last year, right? What month was it out?
November last year.
Yeah. So, yes, go get it because it is lovely. And I'm just really glad that you were able to stop by today and, the day that you hand in a book and, you get a free half hour. What are you going to do with it? My goodness.
Yeah. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to start thinking about the next book I'm
right.
writing.
But no, thank you so much for popping in. We're really glad to have you, and can't wait to see your next one. Like I was telling you earlier, Barb has already pre-ordered it because she's so excited about Jazz Age.
Yay!
So we'll definitely be getting that when it's out. So,
well, thank you so much for having me on. This was lovely.
Oh yeah, come on again.
I happily.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.